The folder hit the desk with a crack, my name on the divorce papers. Professor Sterling's bloodshot eyes locked on me as he lunged, swatting my phone into the radiator. The door was locked, the lights dimmed, and his voice dripped with accusation. You ruined my life. My only weapon? The keycard I'd just stolen from his belt. But the recording device in that folder proved something worse. He'd been stalking me for months. Now he had me cornered, and no one was coming to help. The fluorescent hum of the lecture hall vibrated against Sarah Miller's molars. At the mahogany podium, Professor Robert Sterling adjusted his spectacles, the metal frames catching a sharp glint of morning sun. He didn't speak. He simply rearranged a stack of midterms with a rhythmic, dry scrape of paper on wood. The scent of stale coffee and damp wool rose from the rows of students around her, a heavy, suffocating blanket in the silence. Sarah gripped the edge of her desk, The grain of the faux oak dug into her palms, leaving shallow white crescents in her skin. She reached into her pocket, her fingers finding the small, heavy piece of polished granite. She tapped it against her thigh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The solid thud of the stone reassured her that the floor was holding, that the structural integrity of the building hadn't vanished since she walked through the door. Robert finally lifted the top sheet. He cleared his throat, a sound like gravel turning in a mixer, and scanned the room. His eyes, clouded by cataracts but sharp with a lifetime of academic scrutiny, skipped over the front row and anchored directly on her. He straightened his silk tie 3 times, his fingers twitching with a frantic precision. The integrity of this department, Robert began, his voice a low vibration that seemed to rattle the windows, rests upon the assumption of individual effort. He signaled for the class to dismiss early, but his eyes never left Sarah. As the last student shuffled out, the heavy oak door clicked shut. Robert walked to the entrance and slid the deadbolt home. The metallic clack echoed through the cavernous room, sounding to Sarah like the closing of a tomb. "Sit down, Sarah," he said, his voice dropping an octave. He tossed a thick manila folder onto the mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy slap that puffed a cloud of dust into the air. "I believe you recognize these." Sarah stayed standing. She calculated the distance to the door, 24 feet. The windows were reinforced glass, 10 feet up. "I don't know what those are, Professor." "Divorce papers, Sarah. My wife's filing." He leaned over the desk, the smell of expensive scotch and unwashed desperation rolling off him in waves. "And your name is highlighted on every page." The other woman. The homewrecker who systematically dismantled a 20-year marriage. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical weight. Her mind raced, searching for the logic, the blueprint of this lie. "I've never even met your wife, Robert. This is a fabrication. The structural logic of this claim is non-existent." Robert's face contorted, his skin turning a mottled, violent purple. "Don't you dare talk to me about logic. You've ruined me. And now, I'm going to ensure the university sees exactly what kind of scholar you really are." Sarah's hand darted toward her bag, her fingers inching for her phone. She needed to record this, to call for help. But Robert was faster than his age suggested. He lunged across the desk, his hand clamping down on her wrist with bruising force. He snatched the phone from her grip. "Communication is a privilege," he hissed. He turned and threw the phone with a violent overhand motion. It sailed across the room and slammed into the cast-iron radiator. The screen shattered with a sharp crack, and a small puff of gray smoke drifted from the broken casing. The room smelled of scorched plastic. Sarah stumbled back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You're insane." A heavy thud sounded at the door. Thump, thump. "Hello, Professor Sterling?" A muffled, apologetic voice drifted through the wood. "It's Henderson. I saw the lights were low. Just checking if I should come back later to buff the floors." Sarah opened her mouth to scream, but Robert's hand was suddenly over her face, his palm smelling of ink and old paper. He pressed her head back against the chalkboard, the cold slate biting into her scalp. "Everything is fine, Henderson," Robert shouted, his voice smooth and authoritative, the perfect facade of a man in control. "Miss Miller is finishing a private, high-stakes exam. We are not to be disturbed for the next hour. Understood?" "Oh, sorry. Sorry, Professor. Didn't mean to intrude. I'll go polish the brass in the north wing. Sorry again." The rhythmic squeak of Henderson's cart faded down the hallway, punctuated by his fading apologies to the empty air. Robert released her. Sarah slumped, gasping for air that felt too thin to support her lungs. She looked at the door. It was a solid core, 3-inch oak. The hinges were interior. She couldn't kick it down. She needed to move. She bolted. She didn't think. She just lunged for the narrow gap between Robert and the lectern, her sneakers squealing on the polished floor. She was halfway to the door when he caught her. He didn't just grab her, he tackled her, his shoulders slamming into her ribs. They crashed into a row of wooden chairs. The sound of splintering timber filled the room. Sarah felt a sharp, searing pain in her upper arm as it scraped against a jagged edge of wood. Robert pinned her down, his weight suffocating. Through the haze of pain, Sarah's hand brushed against his waist. She felt the cold, hard plastic of his university keycard clipped to his belt. With a desperate, trembling flick of her fingers, she unhooked it and slid it into the sleeve of her blazer. He shoved her back toward the center of the room, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. He adjusted his tie. 1, 2, 3. "You think you're so smart, Miller," he panted. He walked back to the desk and opened the manila folder. He didn't pull out papers. He pulled out a small black plastic box with a tiny, blinking red light. "I've been watching you. For months. I have recordings of our private meetings, snippets of conversation edited just so. To the dean, it will sound like a confession of an affair. To the board, it will look like you traded favors for grades." Sarah stared at the blinking light. It felt like an eye, cold and unblinking. "You've been stalking me? Why? I'm just a student." "You're a scapegoat, Sarah." Robert's voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper. He leaned into her space, his eyes wide. "The dean is arriving in precisely 30 minutes for the faculty mixer. He's coming here first to check the hall. By the time he walks through that door, you will have signed a full confession. If you don't, I release the recordings to the entire student body. Your reputation, your scholarship, your future, it all collapses, like a house with no foundation." The mention of the foundation made Sarah's hand twitch. She reached into her pocket and tapped the stone. Clack, 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 clack. 30 minutes, Robert repeated, tapping his watch. The metallic tink of his finger on the glass echoed in the silence. Sarah looked around the room. The emergency intercom was mounted on the wall near the chalkboard. If she could reach it, she could alert the campus security center. She began to back toward it, her eyes locked on Robert. "It won't work," Robert said, a cruel smile touching his lips. He walked to the intercom panel and pulled it open. The wires inside hung limp and useless, their copper hearts exposed and severed. "I spent the morning making sure we wouldn't be interrupted. No phones, no intercom, no escape." Sarah felt the walls closing in. The air in the room seemed to drop in temperature, a biting chill that made her breath visible in the dim light. The room felt wrong. The angles were too sharp, the ceiling too heavy. Suddenly, a heavy bust of Plato, perched on the top shelf of the bookcase for decades, began to tilt. It slid forward with agonizing slowness before plummeting. It hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud, shattering into 1,000 white shards. At the same moment, the clock on the back wall began to chime. It wasn't the steady, rhythmic tolling of an hour. It was a frantic, erratic clanging, as if the gears inside were tearing themselves apart. Robert didn't flinch. Robert didn't. He just watched the clock, his eyes glazed. "The time is coming, Sarah. Sign the paper." A shadow appeared against the frosted glass of the door, a silhouette sharp and jagged. Then a voice, high, piercing, and laced with years of accumulated bitterness. "Robert, Robert, I know you're in there." It was Emily Sterling. She pounded on the glass, her rings making a sharp, metallic tapping. "Open this door." The lawyers called. "I know what you did with the joint account. I know about the missing funds." Sarah's heart leaped. An ally, a witness. "Emily, help! He's trapped me in here. Call the police." Robert's face went white, then a deep, bruised red. The mention of the money seemed to snap the last thread of his composure. He didn't move toward the door to answer his wife. Instead, he grabbed a heavy metal pointer from the chalkboard tray, a long, telescoping rod of cold steel. "Be quiet," he roared at the door. Subverted beat 1.8. Sarah saw her chance. Robert was focused on the door, his back turned, his body rigid with fury. This was the moment. If she could get to the door, if she could scream loud enough for Emily to hear the specifics, the stalemate would break. Emily had the leverage. She had the lawyers. Sarah lunged toward the frosted glass, her hand reaching for the deadbolt. "Emily!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hope. "He's embezzling. He's trying to frame me to cover." The hope died in her throat. Robert didn't just yell back. He spun with a speed that defied his frame. He didn't grab her. He swung the heavy metal pointer like a whip. The steel whistled through the air and slammed into the frosted glass of the door, inches from Sarah's head. The glass didn't just crack. It exploded inward in a shower of glittering diamonds. Emily screamed on the other side, a sound of pure terror. And Sarah heard the frantic retreat of heels on the linoleum. "Emily, wait!" Sarah cried, reaching through the jagged hole where the glass had been. But the helper hadn't come to save her. Emily wasn't a rescuer. She was a catalyst for Robert's final descent. Seeing his wife flee, seeing the shattered glass, Robert didn't stagger back in regret. He looked at the hole in the door, then at Sarah, and a terrifying calm settled over his features. He realized that the private nature of his crime was gone. The stakes had just shifted from blackmail to survival. "You shouldn't have done that," Robert whispered. He didn't look like a professor anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. "Now there's no room for a quiet exit. Now, I have to burn the whole thing down." Sarah reached for the hole in the door, hoping to find the handle from the outside. But Robert lunged. He shoved a heavy wooden desk against the door, the metal legs shrieking against the floor. He blocked the exit entirely, wedging the furniture so tightly that the door wouldn't budge even if the lock was turned. Sarah was now truly entombed, and her only potential witness was running for the parking lot, terrified for her own life. The help had only succeeded in making Robert lethal. Sarah scrambled back, her hands finding the legal documents Robert had dropped on the floor during the scuffle. She scrambled to the corner of the room, her eyes scanning the pages under the flickering overhead lights. These aren't divorce papers, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a cold wave. These are internal audit reports. University of Washington. Financial discrepancies in the architecture department. She looked up at Robert. He was standing by the desk, his hands shaking as he adjusted his tie. You weren't being divorced for an affair, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. You were being fired for embezzlement. You've been draining the scholarship fund for years. You're using me as a shield. If you can create a scandal involving me, a top student, you can claim the audit was a retaliatory strike, a way for the university to cover up its own moral failings. Robert didn't deny it. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a small plastic bottle. He unscrewed the cap, and the sharp, chemical stench of lighter fluid filled the room. It doesn't matter what you know, Sarah, he said. He began to pour the clear liquid over the manila folder, then over his own research papers, his leather-bound books, the very history of his career. The narrative is what survives. And tonight, the narrative is that a disgraced student set fire to the department wing to hide her own shame. He pulled a silver Zippo from his pocket. The clink of the lid opening was the loudest sound in the room. He flicked the wheel. A small, orange flame danced in the dimness, reflecting in his wide, frantic eyes. Sign the confession, Sarah, or we both burn. I have nothing left to lose. Sarah's eyes darted to the desk. Robert's private computer terminal was still glowing, the screensaver a scrolling marquee of university slogans. Beside the keyboard was the electronic sensor. She remembered the keycard in her sleeve. The server, she whispered. If I can get to the server, I can stop the upload. Robert saw her gaze. Too late. Sarah didn't wait. She dove for the desk. She wasn't an athlete, but she was fueled by a cold, structural fury. She swiped the keycard across the sensor. A green light blinked. The computer chirped, a friendly digital sound that felt absurd in the face of the flickering lighter. Robert let out a guttural roar and threw himself at her. They hit the desk together. Sarah felt the wind leave her lungs as the edge of the mahogany bit into her stomach. Robert's hands were everywhere, grabbing her hair, clawing at her shoulders, and finally closing around her throat. He pinned her down against the desk, his thumbs pressing into her windpipe. Sarah clawed at his face, her nails leaving red furrows on his cheeks, but he didn't let go. Look, he hissed, forcing her head up toward the massive projector screen at the front of the hall. A progress bar was crawling across the screen. Uploading to all faculty distribution list. 92%. 95%. The timer is set, Sarah. I programmed it this morning. In 10 seconds, your confession, the one I wrote using your own voice from the recordings, goes to every inbox in the D.C. metro area. You'll be a pariah before the fire department even hooks up their hoses. Sarah struggled, her vision swimming with dark spots. She tried to reach the keyboard, her fingers dancing just inches from the escape key. Subverted beat, 1.15. She focused all her strength into one final lunge. She managed to slam her palm down on the keys, hoping to trigger a system crash, a power surge, anything. She felt the keys depress. She felt the haptic click of success. She believed, for one beautiful, shimmering second, that she had cut the throat of the beast. The screen flickered. A dialog box popped up. Cancel upload? Sarah's heart soared. She reached for the mouse, her finger hovering over the yes button. She was going to win. She was going to save herself. Then the screen turned a violent, bruised purple. A new message appeared, written in the cold, unfeeling font of the university's administrative override system. Administrative override detected. Security protocol alpha activated. All outgoing data flagged as critical emergency broadcast. Robert began to laugh, a high, wheezing sound that rattled in his chest. You didn't stop it, Sarah. You just gave it priority status. By trying to hack the system with my card, you triggered the emergency alert system. Now, it won't just go to their inboxes. It's going to their phones. It's going to the emergency monitors in the quad. The progress bar jumped to 100%. Send complete. Sarah slumped against the desk, the fight draining out of her. She watched the screen return to the university logo. It was over. The lie was now the truth. Thousands of people were, at this very moment, reading a fabricated tale of her own disgrace. Her career, her scholarship, the foundation she had spent her entire life trying to build. It hadn't just cracked. It had been pulverized. Robert released his grip on her throat. He didn't need to hold her anymore. He walked to the corner of the room and dropped the flickering lighter into the trash can, which was overflowing with fluid-soaked papers. A whoosh of heat hit Sarah's face. The flames leaped up instantly, licking at the heavy velvet curtains that framed the chalkboard. The room began to fill with a thick, acrid smoke that smelled of chemicals and old dust. Sarah scrambled toward the door, but the heat was already intense. She reached for the deadbolt, but the metal was searing. She pulled her hand back, the skin on her palm red and blistering. The heat had caused the old iron bolt to expand within the frame. It was jammed, trapped, Robert whispered, sitting in the front row of chairs as the fire climbed the walls behind him. We're both trapped in the blueprint, Sarah. Sarah didn't listen. She couldn't afford to. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the granite stone. She tapped it against her thigh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The floor was still solid. The structure was still there. She looked at the windows, 10 feet up, reinforced glass. She looked at the heavy architecture textbook on the floor, the principles of structural integrity. She grabbed the book. It weighed 10 pounds, a dense brick of knowledge and paper. She didn't just throw it. She climbed onto the radiator, the heat melting the soles of her shoes. She found the exact point of the window where the stress was highest. The lower left corner, near the mounting bracket. She swung the book with everything she had. The glass shattered, not into dust, but into large, jagged shards that fell like guillotines. Cold night air rushed into the room, clashing with the heat and creating a violent swirl of smoke. Sarah didn't look back at Robert. She used his keycard one last time, swiping it against the wall-mounted security panel near the window. In the university system, this card had the power to trigger a total facility lockdown in case of a shooter. The heavy steel shutters of the lecture hall slammed down over the doors and the broken window frame, sealing the room. But Sarah was already halfway through the gap. She tumbled out onto the narrow stone ledge 3 stories above the quad. Behind her, she heard the muffled roar of the fire and the sound of Robert Sterling screaming as the lockdown he had helped design became his cage. Sarah clung to the stone ledge, the cold wind whipping her hair across her face. Below, she saw the blue and red lights of police cars racing toward the building. She waited. She didn't cry. She just held the granite stone in her hand, feeling its weight, its reality. An hour later, she was sitting on the grass, a gray wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The air smelled of wood smoke and ozone. Miss Miller? She looked up. Dean Richardson was standing there, his face pale, his gold pocket watch clutched in his hand. Beside him was a woman from the IT department, her face illuminated by the glow of a tablet. "We received the email," the dean said, his voice trembling. Sarah closed her eyes. I know. No, the IT woman interrupted. You don't understand. When you swiped that card at the terminal, you didn't just trigger an override. You flagged the account for a phishing and data integrity audit. The system didn't broadcast the email. It quarantined it. It's sitting in a secure buffer, waiting for manual review. Sarah opened her eyes. It didn't go out? Not a single person saw it, the dean said. And the logs? They show the file was created on Professor Sterling's home computer 3 weeks ago, along with the audit reports he was trying to burn. Sarah looked toward the building. Firefighters were wheeling a gurney out of the north exit. Robert Sterling was strapped to it, his face covered in soot, his hands cuffed to the rails. Officer Michael Davis walked beside him, his fingers popping his knuckles in a steady, rhythmic sequence. The dean looked at Sarah, his expression one of profound apology. We've found the recordings, Sarah, and the forged papers. Your scholarship is safe. Your record is spotless. Sarah stood up. She felt the grass beneath her feet, real, solid, and unyielding. She didn't need the stone anymore. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the piece of granite, and set it gently on the base of the founder's statue. The foundation is fine, Dean, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. It was just the surface that was rotting. She walked away, her shadow long and sharp under the campus lights, leaving the ruins of Robert Sterling's masterpiece behind her. For the first time in her life, she didn't count the steps. She just walked.